The Stanford game is as big as any that we've seen in the Chris Klieman era so far. That may seem like a hyperbolic statement, but let's think about where this program has been. October 24th, K-State beats Kansas 55-14. Somewhere Les Miles is still punting the ball to Phillip Brooks, right? It's a fun day. You're on top of the world. K-State is competing for a Big 12 championship even without Skylar. Huge game at West Virginia next week. Big-time college football here. Cats are ranked. Let's go, baby. Since then, nary a win. 0-5, lose by almost 23 points per game. 2 heartbreakers, 2 total gut punches, and then a couple of super embarrassing losses as well. Okay? It was not fun at all to end the year. There have been no major recruiting wins since then. Your biggest recruiting highlight is beating Boston College for Marvin Martin in terms of new, fresh commitments that you didn't already have at the time. There has been very little to get fans legitimately excited about the football program in a long time. I mean, that is forever. If you're talking about short attention span 2021 world, it has been forever since there has been something to get really legitimately excited about with the K-State football program. You have a chance with a marquee matchup against a pretty marquee team in Stanford at definitely a marquee venue the opening week of the season on September 4th to make a statement. And this is the kind of game that can swing seasons and swing narratives about the season. Because, like Chris Klieman, okay? Think about it. Guy's got a new contract. What we've heard from he and the staff has basically been, I mean, obviously they know they have to do better, but they have addressed and brought up the fact that there were locker room and culture issues toward the end of last year. They've obviously brought up the fact that like they were ravaged by COVID at the end of the year, in particular, like for the Iowa State and Texas games. And I can follow them with those explanations as to how things happened the way that they did. Certainly Skylar Thompson, that's another part of this. Skylar Thompson being out for the year definitely affected things. You can follow that as reasoning. But what we've been hearing for a long time now is just a lot of talk about what it was that last season was and how they're going to be better. And it's like, hey, it's one thing if you want to talk and admit, like, hey, I have not been doing my part to get in shape. I would love to get in shape, but things have been difficult. I've been traveling on the road for work a lot. I haven't had time to make my meals or get in a workout. Well, look, now you're back home. Now you have somebody making the meals. Now you've got a chance to go exercise. If instead of going to the gym, you're going to sit at home and eat pizza. But hey, you're not being the new man that you claimed to be. This is the opportunity to be the new man that you've claimed to be. And Chris Klieman has a big, fat new contract hanging out around this as well that was given to him in the middle of last year. If you go out and lose this game, all of a sudden the narrative very quickly will turn to maybe things aren't really fixed. Maybe 2020 was not an aberration. Now look at what's coming up in the Big 12. Because the Big 12 schedule, it's easy to forget, is at Oklahoma State and then Oklahoma and Iowa State. Bang, bang, bang. That is how you start the league. It is an incredibly front-loaded schedule. And so the problem with that, if you're K-State and if you're Klieman and if you're a program that's gone a long time without much juice to speak of, much to get your fans excited, is that even if you go through that first part of the schedule and you wind up like 2-4 and you came through the back half and you ended up with a 7-5 season and finished very strong, it doesn't hold as much weight as if the schedule were flipped and you were able to build some real momentum, get yourself feeling pretty good about where the program is going, and then some stumbling blocks late, especially again when you go all the way back to like the last 5 games of last season were so bad. Like you would be stringing together 0-5 and then potentially 2-4 if you were to lose all 3 of those games, which would be understandable at the beginning of the Big 12 schedule. Fair or not, that's just going to get you killed with the fans, and it's going to kill momentum with the program. It just puts more pressure on that Stanford game. You need to stop the bleeding, and you need to do it because what's coming up is a gauntlet to start the league. I understand Klieman has sprung a major upset each of the last 2 years, his only 2 years in purple, but I don't think it's fair to be like counting on that when you have Oklahoma, Iowa State at Oklahoma State coming up to start the year. Things have not gone very well against Oklahoma State, for Klieman, and then Oklahoma and Iowa State will both be top 10 teams. And even, Mitch, I can tell you if they lose that Stanford game, you'll even start to hear stronger whispers about what the other two non-conference games are. Because Nevada, I mean, they've been to 3 straight bowl games. They've beaten Purdue and Oregon State over the last 2 years. Not exactly giant killers, but they have beaten lower-level Power 5 opponents and gone to bowl games and won bowl games. Missouri State did pummel North Dakota State 38-14 and won a playoff game in FCS. Now, I'm not particularly worried about Missouri State, and I think that would be reactionary. But this is where the narrative will start to pick up and go. And this is, understandably so, where fans' minds will start to go if the season begins with a loss in this game that you moved and you took away from Manhattan to go get money, go get exposure, and hopefully help recruiting. And if you fall flat on your face in that game, bookending that on what happened at the end of last year, the narrative will get, I think, pretty out of control pretty quick with the season, which is largely why, to me, it's so damn important to go out and win the game against Stanford to start the year.
I don't know if it was a couple of weeks ago on this show or if it was on the morning show. It might have been both, but I did talk about how, the first game back at Bill Snyder Family Stadium is going to be a great environment. September 11th, because the tickets are being sold at full capacity. We're expecting 100% capacity to be the first game back at Bill Snyder Family Stadium. I think win or lose that Stanford game, the environment will still be fun because the fans are back at home. But the hope of the team will not be exactly there if K-State doesn't beat Stanford on September 4th, because you're right, the narrative could go so many ways depending on how this game is played on September 4th. And there is a lot riding on that. Not only you're talking about, you're worried about the non-conference schedule. Southern Illinois, I've been looking at those guys for a while. I don't know exactly who they bring back, but they are upsetting dudes left and right this past season for the FCS, beating top 25 teams. They were doing extremely well against some of the top teams in the FCS. But beating Stanford, I mean, that still doesn't guarantee you're going to just roll in and just whoop these non-conference teams. It's not exactly the easiest of schedules, but it adds a lot of hope. You need to keep the fan base in good graces right now because of the 5-game losing streak that the 2020 season ended. But the narrative is Skylar Thompson is back. We're looking at him, now number 7, to lead this team where it probably should have been last year, because when he went down in the Texas Tech game, but Will Howard was still pulling out some victories, we were thinking, man, this team could maybe fight for a spot in the Big 12 championship game. I think a lot of people think, with a healthy Skylar Thompson, a healthy Deuce Vaughn, hopefully some weapons on defense and some guys that can catch the football, there's a good chance this team could go a long way. But if you start out of the gate and you trip out of the blocks and you do not pick up this victory against Stanford, that changes the narrative instantly, in my opinion.
Because you don't have the excuses that you have from last year. Again, excuses to explanations. I lean slightly more toward explanation than excuse when we're talking about COVID and we're talking about Skylar and we're talking about players transferring in the locker room stuff at the end of the year. But you don't have that anymore. The transfers, you went out and got 6 transfers that pretty much all are very good locker room guys, 3 or 4 of which, that is really the specialty and what stands out about them. Cut a lot of the dead weight. Skylar is ahead of schedule, we've been told, injury-wise, in terms of recovering. So all that stuff is out the window. Now it's put up or shut up time. And it's year 3. I've been very patient with what's going on the recruiting trail, for instance, saying hey, they're working with this extended dead period and COVID and it does hurt them. But at a certain point, the rubber has to meet the road and you do have to start producing some results. And to me, this is that time. This is that time for that game against Stanford, especially when you're still just trying to get your bearings and figure out what exactly this program is going to be and what was more the aberration, 2020 or 2019. You're also looking at Neil Brown, because that's a guy that you could have hired, supposedly the finalists, and I definitely believe and have been told, the finalists were Neil Brown and Chris Klieman. You could have had both. Neil Brown at West Virginia beats Klieman in year 1, but did have a worse season overall. Then year 2, he goes 6-4. You go 4-6, totally tank, get blown out by West Virginia, lose for a second time to Neil Brown. He's been recruiting now very well. Certainly has generated more buzz on the recruiting trail than what Klieman has so far. And you'd have to watch what West Virginia does in 2021. But these are the kinds of things that will start coming very quickly into the rearview mirror. If it's like, man, okay, this is a 2-4 start. Now Neil Brown's 5-1. He's already beaten you twice. He's doing better on the trail. He had a better 2020. Like, oh, what is this decision that we just made? And we gave Chris Klieman this big contract. That is another thing that does, like it or not, hang over all of this. K-State, I agreed with it at the time. I still think it was the right move. But you needed to go lock Klieman up if you thought he was your guy because of some of the Iowas of the world that could be potentially sniffing around. And if you're K-State, you have to take a chance and err on the side of just being too early. But that's still a lot of money and a very long-term commitment to Klieman. So you want to make sure that you were right. And it starts to feel differently if it's, man, we did give for K-State, a pretty darn big contract to that guy. And now he's being outperformed by the other finalists. And we're dragging on that October 24th number now through this Stanford game. And it's going to be a rough start to the Big 12 season. Skylar's leaving at the end of the year. Like, where is this thing actually headed? These are the narratives that will start to get spun, win or lose. Now, on the other side, we haven't covered much of the positive side. This has been more of a, hey, cautionary tale, what can happen if you lose the game? But on a positive side, hey, 2019 was a great year. Chris Klieman took that team without an NFL draft pick and won 8 games, an 8-4 regular season, pulled a major upset of Oklahoma. He's done that twice, been the giant killer twice. When he had a healthy roster in 2020, they looked pretty darn good, and they looked like they were going to compete for a Big 12 championship. Now, come in, get this primetime game against Stanford, back on the right track, baby, got the win. Last year it was COVID and Skylar. Let's roll. Beat up your two non-conference opponents. Let's go into conference play and try and be the giant killers there at the beginning. Have some excitement for the season. The fun quotient for the season, as I always talk about, lasts longer. It extends into the start of league play. Now the Klieman believers can come back out and be like, all right, we do have our guy. We feel good about this. Recruiting will pick back up now with a season to sell and more wins to sell and exposure to sell and no dead period to worry about. That's the flip side. Both sides very important. Both sides, I think, convey the importance of what this game will be.